That's the whole reason why we're here. So really do appreciate that, giving up some of your evening to participate tonight. Also, thanks to the town of Rockingham and Village of Bellows Falls for providing the space to facilitate this meeting. This is a public informational meeting for Great River Hydro's application for a water quality certification for the Bellows Falls Hydroelectric Project. We'll get into a lot more about really what that means, but before we do, I just wanted to introduce myself and our team here today. I'm Eric Davis. I'm an ecologist with the Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation. We work in the stream flow protection section of the Watershed Management Division, and that means we work on issues that affect the flow in rivers. So that goes on everything from water withdrawals to snowmaking to hydroelectric power, which is the focus of the meeting today. Betsy?
Thank you. So yes, Betsy Samard, Vermont DEC, also part of the Stream Flow Protection Program. Yeah, I think Eric covered it pretty well. We're very ecologists working on the projects.
And I'm Jeff Crocker. I supervise the Stream Flow Protection section.
So I'm going to pass it off to Jeff here to go through the substance of the meeting today. But before I do, I just want to give an overview of our purpose here today. You all have probably interacted with this process before through FERC. The state also has a role in this process. So we'll be talking about what the state's role is and also what that process looks like. Then we'll also be providing a really high-level overview of Great River Hydro's application for the water quality certification. Really, there are volumes of material there. We're just distilling it down to some main components. So we'll discuss sort of what's before us for consideration, and then most importantly, the real purpose here is to invite comments from you all on aspects that you'd like us to consider in reviewing that application. Traditionally, statutorily, we're required to issue a draft decision and receive public comments on that. But this process, these informational meetings, are really to ensure that we've covered, we've collected input before we engage in our decision-making process. So that's really the purpose of these meetings. I think we're in Vermont here. We tend to do pretty well with civil discourse, but sort of be respectful. People might have different viewpoints out there. Be a good listener, and with that, I'll kick it off to Jeff.
All right, thanks, Eric, and thank you all for coming. So apologies if this is the third time you've seen this, but this will be very similar to the last couple nights. So just to kind of lay out what we're going to go into more detail here tonight and through the presentation and then through our discussions. We'll recap the Federal Regulatory Energy Commission and the relicensing process of the Bellows Falls project that we'll be speaking about tonight. We'll review the Federal Clean Water Act and Section 401, as well as how that water quality certification plays into the FERC relicensing process. And we'll review the application before us from GRH for the relicensing and the water quality certification. And then we'll discuss what Vermont DEC's review of the 401 is and entails, and how the public can remain engaged through the process and the timelines that we are thinking of issuing different steps along the way. And then we'll open up the meeting to take your comments, discussion, and answer any questions you have about the process going forward. So, as a refresher, for the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC, is the lead federal regulator for the hydroelectric project relicensing. They license, inspect private, municipal, and state hydroelectric projects. They enforce FERC regulatory statutes and license requirements that are issued to licensees, as well as overseeing matters related to natural gas and hydroelectric project in terms of relicensing that is running through the National Environmental Protection Act process, or the NEPA process. Kind of recap where we have been with the Bellows Falls relicensing. This has taken time. We're almost 12 years into the process from the initial pre-application document and notice of intent that the company submitted to FERC, initiating the relicensing of the facility. During the process, initially the integrated licensing process that was used by FERC, stakeholders put in study requests, there's study determination. As a result of that, Great River Hydro conducted 33 studies in a variety of different resources to look at the effects of current operations on the river. The information gathered as part of those studies has been used by Great River Hydro as well as the stakeholders and resource agencies through the process of consultation. And this resulted in a couple amendments to the original FERC license application that was submitted in April 2017. So the first one was the first amendment in December of 2020 that proposed an alternative operation for the Bellows Falls project. And then the second one was in June of 2023 that incorporated some aspects of fish passage as well as a minimum flow turbine, which we will talk more about. And then recently, as part of the FERC process, in February of of this year, FERC issued the what's called the Ready for Environmental Analysis Notice. And what this means is, from FERC's view, the applications have enough information for them to start their environmental review under the NEPA process, which is required by them. At the same time, this kicks off the state process of where an applicant for a federal license from FERC needs to apply to the state for what we call a Section 401 water quality certification. And in Vermont, the delegated authority to issue those is the Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation that we work for. So what is Section 401 and what is this water quality certification? Where does that authority come from? To answer this, we have to back up to the Federal Clean Water Act that was passed in the early 70s. The goal of this, purpose of it, was to restore, maintain the chemical, physical, and biological integrity of the nation's waters. It proposed to do this lofty goal by laying out several provisions around, discharging of pollutants into water bodies, requiring states to monitor and identify impaired waters and develop plans to repair those. But essential to the relicensing of a federal project is the requirement that a state establish water quality standards, and also it provided the state's authority to certify a project or an activity that needed a federal license, that it would meet the state requirements or the state laws for that activity. And so that is what is known as Section 401, and this is where the water quality certification is. So in general, water quality standards, in essence, set defined goals for our water bodies. They include management objectives for designated uses of the waters. They set criteria necessary to meet and protect those uses. And in each state has to develop its own set of water quality standards per the Federal Clean Water Act. Those standards are submitted to the EPA, and the EPA reviews and has to approve them. In Vermont, we review and update our water quality standards on a triannual basis. There is also, we also go through a state process of through the rulemaking and through the legislative process, and before the water quality standards go to EPA for approval. So there's a state and federal in Vermont. And some of the characteristics or components that are in Vermont water quality standards, it contains designated uses. Those are like aquatic habitat, aquatic biota. It has classification of waters for each use. So in Vermont, we have class B2, that's what the Connecticut River is classified. We also have B1, A1, and A2. It contains water quality criteria around temperature and dissolved oxygen and what those values should be, and an anti-degradation section. So Section 401 of the Federal Clean Water Act states that any applicant that's discharging to a navigable water needs to obtain a certification from the state demonstrating that it will apply or will meet basically the state's water quality standards. That certification must certify compliance with those uses and criteria that the state has in its water quality standards. It may include conditions to ensure that that activity meets the standards, or it can be denied if it's determined through process and review that the activity will not meet our standards in the state. And importantly, the conditions of a 401 that are issued by the state become conditions of the federal license. So on to the Connecticut River and the relicensing that's been taking place. Here tonight we're talking specifically about the Bellows Falls Hydroelectric Project, but that is one of several the projects that are going through relicensing currently. And there is Wilder project to the north of Bellows Falls and Vernon to the south. These are both operated by Great River Hydro. And then further south in Massachusetts, there's the Northfield Pump Storage Station and the Turner's Falls, which are also being going through the relicensing process simultaneously with FERC. But those are operated by First Light. So just to orient ourselves to the project components itself, this slide, we've got the Connecticut River flowing in from the corner and comes down to the bottom of the slide. The river we have the dam that crosses the river, has 2 roller gates and stanchion bays. The dam diverts water to what is known as the power canal. The power canal flows water into the intakes where the powerhouse, where there are 3 units. Water is discharged through the powerhouse and into the tail race where it joins back up with the Connecticut River down in this corner. Some of the components at the powerhouse itself are fish passage facilities. They have both upstream and downstream fish passage facilities. They have a public visitor center and fish ladder window that is operated there. One component that is different than the 2 other projects we spoke to previous nights is the presence of what we call a bypass reach. And that's the reach of river that water is diverted around for the hydroelectric project. So this is just, basically the bypass reach. And then one other, some recreational components that are nearby, in this map at least, is the Pine Street picnic area and boat launch takeout and the portage area that goes around the the project itself. So before we get into discussing what the current proposal is for relicensing, we want to first talk about how it currently operates. So currently, under the existing license that Great River has to operate the project, they can vary flows between the minimum flow requirement and the full generation capacity of the project. The minimum flow is 1083 or 1083 CFS, or inflow if less. However, they're typically operating around 1200 CFS out of there for their min flow. The maximum station capacity for when all three units are on is approximately 11,400 CFS. And the impoundment as licensed is permitted to be operated in a 3-foot band, although typically it's more on the 1.2 feet when they're operating. So this hydrograph here shows how that affects river flows. So this hydrograph is from the USGS gauge that is operated downstream in the North Walpole, New Hampshire. And it basically shows the daily fluctuations that occur during power generation as they're currently licensed to operate. Under the proposed project operations, the first part of this, they're operating to proposing to operate in what we're calling an inflow equals outflow mode. The goal of this is to reduce the frequency and the amplitude and rate of changes that we saw from the previous slide from the daily fluctuations that were caused by the project. This will decrease the impoundment fluctuations as well as those downstream flow fluctuations. And to do this, GRH is proposing to maintain a water surface elevation of 291.1 plus or minus half a foot at the dam, and to maintain flows below the project equal to approximate calculated inflow at the dam. So water coming into the dam, they will adjust the units to pass that through the powerhouse and downstream of the Connecticut River. One way that we can look at how this will affect the current affect the river is to compare the current operations and the proposed operations and how much the impoundment will fluctuate. So under the current operations, under the current operations, the target elevation of the impoundment is between 0.4% and 10% of the time it's maintained at that 291.1. Under what's being proposed, it will be maintained there between 50.8% to 96% of the time. So much less fluctuation of the impoundment over the scale. And this data comes from GRH's application, where they modeled data from using a wet year to a dry year to look at various conditions and different months that have biological significance. And the other part of their proposal is what we're calling flexible operations, in which this allows the deviation from the inflow equals outflow operations for limited discretionary generation at the project. The flexible operations will be limited by the number of hours shown on the table there. So 10 to 65 hours in a month, depending on where we are in a season or a year. Additionally, the operations, flexible operations, are bounded by constraints on the maximum discharge permitted. When inflows are below 1,800 CFS, max can be no greater than 4,500 CFS. When inflows are above there, the max is 2.5 times the calculated inflow at the dam. They're also bounded by how far they can draw down the impoundment. So for Bellows, the proposal is between October and May 31st it'll be 1.5 feet. And between June 1st and September 1st or 30th, it will be 1 foot at the dam. The proposal also includes transition operations. These refer to up-ramping and down-ramping requirements that the company has proposed, as well as a time period that the refill needs to occur. So once they operate in that flex, they have 48 hours to refill that impoundment, and as well as minimum flow requirements. Additional parts of GRH's proposal is they're proposing a bypass conservation flow to that bypass reach. They're proposing to pass a minimum continuous flow of 300 CFS. They're proposing to pass this through a minimum flow unit that will be installed at the dam. They are proposing to operate the fish passage or the fish ladders at all three projects, but in Bellows, from April 1st to July 15th. They're also proposing to adhere to the fish passage agreement that was reached between them and the fisheries agencies, which lays out a systematic way of implementing, designing any upgrades that may be needed to address some of the fish passage issues that may be present at the dam. They're also proposing to maintain the Charleston boat launch and picnic area, the Herrick's Cove boat launch picnic area, Pine Street facilities, as well as the fish ladder visitor center at the project area, as well as develop a recreation plan. So that's what's in the application that's before us that we're reviewing at a high level. So what does DEC's review of this application cover in the section 401? First, DEC must find that there is reasonable assurance that the operations of the facility, as conditioned, will comply with the state water quality standards. This includes the protection of existing and designated uses, such as the aquatic biota, wildlife, aquatic habitat, aesthetics, recreation for swimming, boating, and fishing, as well as meet the applicable numerical and narrative criteria that are within our standards. And this includes things as the hydrology criteria and the temperature dissolved oxygen criteria. So how does this process play out, and what are the outcomes that could occur as the agency is processing the application? The first thing that we need to talk about is this review has to happen over a certain period of time, and that time limit is set by the federal agency. So in this case, it's FERC who says to the states, you have 1 year to act, which is the maximum allowable time that we are allowed to process a 401 under the Clean Water Act. The 4 outcomes of an application can be that the state can grant the certification. We can grant the certification with conditions, and those conditions will become part of the FERC license. We can waive by notice, which we would send a letter to FERC and GRH and say we're waiving our authority here. Or we waive by inaction by not acting within the 1 year time period. The other option is we can deny the application that the activity will not meet our state standards. So specifically talking about the timeline for Great River Hydro's 401 application. Vermont DEC received the application on April 19th of this year. So we have to act on that application by April 18th of 2025. As we play this process out, DEC will issue a draft decision on public notice for 30 days. We're expecting to issue this draft decision around mid-November. As part of that draft notice, we will invite public comments for 30 days on the decision. We'll also be holding public hearings to take testimony and comments on that decision that will go on the record. Comments will be reviewed and incorporated, if appropriate, into the final decision. When we do issue a final decision on the application, we will be issuing a responsiveness summary to the comments. So all the comments we receive, the substantive ones, we will have a written comment, response to the written comments that we received during that period of time. But prior to any of that, we're in now what we're calling a public information session, where we're taking information that people have prior to even issuing a decision, so that we can bring it into our mix into our analysis while we process the applications. And while we're welcoming any comments, I just want to clarify, if you have commented in the FERC filings, those comments are being looked at by the state as well. You are more than welcome to share them again directly with us. We will take them, but just know those are already in the 401 record that we are reviewing. Additionally, this meeting isn't your only chance to provide comments. We're opening up a comment period till October 1 on the applications. So if you have data, information, comments that may be relevant to our review, we ask you to send those. You can send them to me. My contact information is there. It's also be on the next slide. I also have cards for people who can send me any information or comments that they have. So I think with that, we'd like to open it up to you all to hear your comments, answer questions you may have about the process, about anything, and we can have this discussion. Thank you.
Hey Jeff, I have just a clarifying question.
Yeah.
Sean Raganish from Great River. The comments that come in, or the transcript, or the audio, or whatever might occur even from this meeting, is that published somewhere on your site?
We're going to try to put them up on our. We have a website, as you're aware. We're going to try to get those up, embedded onto that website, so we'll have them public will have access to them.
And as comments come in, will they be posted somehow, or I'm just curious.
I haven't really given that too much thought, John.
Okay.
Yeah. It's a good question.
Yeah, it is a good question, and that's something we can take back and try to figure out how we can host that. Kathy?
A couple of questions. One, so what you guys presented as what's included in the application is really what was in the amended final license application submitted in December of 2020. And then after that, and I'm specifically talking about recreation, right?
Oh, okay.
So after that, Great River Hydro had to respond to an additional information request that included these Excel spreadsheets that had more detailed information on other recreational amenities. So, you know, I feel like because the volume of documents in the FERC docket is so expansive, and the application to the state kind of just references the FERC docket, is there some like really hard line around exactly what is in the application in terms of like, I mean, I know it's sort of laid out, the fishery settlement agreement, but like, for instance, that additional information, the response to that additional information,
Yeah, I mean,
is that formally part of that application?
Typically, when you look at the way we do 401s, we start with the pre-application document to the last filing of in that FERC record. So everything in the FERC record we try to incorporate into our review of the 401.
So it's the whole
we-
docket?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
In the draft decision, the preamble, there's language about sort of like up until date X.
Is the information that was considered for this decision.
God love you guys.
It's obviously it's been 12 years and there's a lot of material to go through.
You know, our administrative record can go beyond the FERC record, you know, these comments might not be submitted to FERC, but coming to us,
Right.
but the FERC record is part of our administrative record.
Another question, and this is like my own, you know, ignorance and constant learning. You know, as we've been digging into this, and because we're sort of looking at 3 states, we can compare how information is shared. It seems like for Vermont, I mean, for New Hampshire and Massachusetts, there's these very clear tables where you can find a reach of the river. You can see exactly how it's classified, you can see the designated uses, and you can see the, you know, whether it's impaired or not for that particular designated use. I have not been able to find that for Vermont, and what I have found sort of references the tactical basin plans.
That would be where, that would be where it is.
So, like, am I missing something? Because, so like, the question that comes to mind, the canal, what are the designated uses for the canal? And is that defined somewhere in Vermont's documentation? So that
Typically, you can find what is classified, other than, a lot of our waters are classified as B2 across the state. If it's not classified as B2, the A&R Atlas will show that it's classified as something else for different uses. We classify things per use in Vermont. Then there is a section in the Atlas where you can turn on, it will show impaired waters that are listed in our, you know, A through F that we submit to the EPA every other year. That is also in the Atlas, and if you click on those, it will show you the impaired reaches. And those will have, like, it's impaired for, you know, aquatic use or aquatic life use, which would be aquatic biota and aquatic habitat, or aesthetics.
The Atlas pulls a lot of that information together, but it also exists in impaired waters lists that are available on our website. And in the water quality standards, if some of those waters that are classified for other than B2 are also identified.
Those are an appendix in the back of the standards.
Right, where the classification's been changed. Okay, that's helpful. I've not dug into that.
Rick Cowan, Town of Rockingham. Has the discovery of the short-nosed sturgeon, the documented discovery of that species just below the dam here, has that affected any of your findings or any of your recommendations?
It hasn't affected, we're just looking at the proposal. We haven't put out recommendations. So the proposal, as far as I know, hasn't changed since the short-nosed sturgeon was found present.
It is an endangered species, am I right, or threat?
It,
Federally listed.
yes, I think he probably knows more than I do about it.
Yeah, so it's really interesting. For the state of Vermont, short in documentation and stuff that the state of Vermont has, it's technically not present, but it is listed at the federal level.
And what does that difference mean for us?
It kind of means who takes priority for looking at it.
In terms
Yeah.
of protecting its habitat through whatever the dam does that's positive or negative for it, how will that work?
I think it's mostly gonna be at a federal level, that whole issue.
So FERC would,
It's not gonna be FERC, it's gonna be probably NIMS.
It's NIMS,
NIMS, yeah,
okay.
yeah,
which is the National Marine
Fisheries.
Fisheries Service.
Thank you, Katie.
Yeah,
Thank
yeah,
you.
yeah.
Thanks.
Did you?
I think Kathy answered my question.
Oh, okay.
About this particular.
Bob?
I'm Bob Nastor with American Whitewater. I'm here also representing the Appalachian Mountain Club, who couldn't be here today. I'll spare you the introduction from last night. I assume you'll look at the video from that and carry it forward. I've been involved in this project for the last 12 years, along with the other Connecticut River projects down into Massachusetts. I had an opportunity before the meeting today to stop by and look into the Bellows Falls bypass reach from the Vilas Bridge. This is the area that is largely dewatered by current operations. This project was last licensed in 1979. That was prior to the passage of the Electric Consumers Protection Act, which created an equal consideration mandate at the federal level, where developmental values, meaning power generation, are balanced against other aspects of environmental quality, including aquatic habitat and recreation. The condition that this section of the river has been in, specifically the bypass reach, which is what I want to talk about tonight, would never have been licensed today in that form. I don't know if Vermont issued a 401 certification back in 1979, but that in and of itself is troubling, that it was allowed to remain in this condition over that time. All the flows of the Connecticut River are blocked at the dam. The entire Connecticut River is routed around Bellows Falls through canals and penstocks into powerhouses before it returns to the river about 3/4 of a mile downstream. The only flow into the bypass reach today is around 300 CFS, which is considered leakage from the flashboard. The proposal that they continue to release 300 CFS is essentially a proposal that they continue leaking water. It's not a meaningful amount of water added either for habitat or for recreation. I've spent some time in the bypass reach. We had a whitewater boating study. It's very difficult to access. It's sort of a goat path going down to it. The notable feature of access is certainly the homeless encampments that are there, were there then, and I assume are still there today. The community of Bellows Falls is completely disconnected from the river. There's no interaction whatsoever with the river. There is no access. There's no easy way to get down there to enjoy it. There's no fish. There's no ability to go down there and enjoy just being in the Connecticut River as there is in other places. The portage route. There's a portage route on the North Walpole side. You would see it by the sign that I guess follows along Route 5, is it? Is that Route 5? The other side of the river?
12.
Oh, excuse me, 12 on the other side of the river. And there's a sign of somebody carrying a canoe on the opposite, upside down on top of their head, which they would have to do along the highway for a mile before they could put it back in. There's no portage of any meaningful way on this river. There's no flow information provided to know when the project is spilling what sort of flow is in the bypass reach. At the bottom of this reach is this fish barrier dam, or as it's sometimes called, the salmon stopper dam. There is no salmon restoration effort here. A lot of people, a lot of times these bypass reaches, I looked at the design that you had showed with the fish ladder kind of below the project. You have a fish barrier dam there, so fish don't go into the bypass reach, where there's no fish passage, where there's no flow. So that's essentially what that dam does. That dam is owned by Great River Hydro. We have documentation from the Connecticut River Atlantic Salmon Commission, which shows that it's theirs and they're responsible. Also, in that bypass reach, there are some, I don't know if you want to call them petroglyphs or ancient rock drawings there. And some of the tribal communities have voiced concern about those as well. So the whitewater boating study, which we did as part of the relicensing, showed that it's really a remarkable resource if you can get some flow in that area. There are rapids ranging from class 3 to class 4. We evaluated flows from 1,500 CFS to 10,000 CFS, found that flows in the neighborhood of 2,500 or 5,000 CFS provided excellent whitewater boating opportunities. I understand that a member of DEC has run that reach on occasion as well, Ryan McCall. There is the dam, the lack of access, the lack of information are all barriers to existing recreation use. Also, in terms of the river itself, the Connecticut River's Paddlers Trail goes through this area. But the erratic flows, the bypass reach, many reasons make this area inaccessible. Great River Hydro has made some proposals here. Their proposal for the bypass reach is that there should be virtually no flow, no access, no flow information. Let's just keep things the way they are, the way they've been for the last 40 years. Great River Hydro agrees that the fish barrier dam no longer serves any purpose. If you look at the settlement agreements involving fish passage, they agree that it doesn't need to be there. Where the disagreement is they don't want to pay to take it out. They want somebody else to pay to take out their dam that serves no purpose, their dam that's essentially just debris in a river that's blocking it. All of the resource agencies, to my understanding, support the removal of the barrier dam. This river, like other rivers we've worked on together, like on the Missisquoi, where you've got a bypass reach, releases of water for recreational boating are possible. We're not asking that they peak to provide recreation opportunity, that they store and release. We're just asking, like on the Missisquoi, that they return the natural flows to the natural river, and that they do that on a schedule so that the public can take advantage of recreation opportunities that it would provide. The state has an obligation under Section 401 of the Clean Water Act to protect designated and existing uses. That includes recreational boating. There should be scheduled release flows during the boating season. The state should also require the removal of the barrier dam as a condition of this licensing. Overall, I think there's a lot of work to be done. What's proposed in this application is not a good deal for the people of Bellows Falls. It's not a good deal for the people of Vermont. This is an important recreational use that should be protected. I've heard some people say, well, straightening out the flows on the Connecticut River are really important. There's going to be less peaking. And I can see there will be less peaking. At the same time, 15-mile falls to Wilder, to flexible operations here at Wilder and here, this river is still going to fluctuate. It's not a natural hydrograph at the end of the day. I concede it will be better. But I've heard people say, well, the Bellows Falls bypass reach, that's the sacrificial river reach. We don't really care about this. We really care about straightening out the river more. But I don't think that under Vermont water quality standards, that's appropriate. I think there's 3/4 miles of river that provides habitat, provides recreation opportunity, and the state should require Great River Hydro to operate this project in a way that protects Vermont water quality standards. Thank you.
And you will share those with us,
I will.
those comments? Okay.
Matt Conklin. I'm a fisherman. I've been on the river since 1985. And the one thing I've noticed is that, especially in the spring, that as I'm fishing and I'm in the setbacks all the way from Vernon on up, they dry up. And quite often, the fish eggs that are in there, from the spawning, they're exposed to air. And a lot of them, especially the perch, the crappie, the bass, they die. And the fish population in the river has changed a lot over the year. And it's become apparent through all my fishing that certain fish like the walleye and pike are doing well, but other fish are not. And it's, I believe, primarily because they don't have a chance to spawn. And when they do spawn, their eggs are destroyed. That's just my observation.
Yeah, there was some studies around the effects of operations on spring spawners as part of the relicensing. So a lot that we have that data as part of the record. Yep.
So your comment about when, at the dam, if they do a release, it can't vary more than 1 foot, right?
So an inflow equals outflow. They're gonna try to maintain that 291.1 foot at the dam.
Right.
But the band is basically leeway because, you know, wave action and other stuff.
But would that translate 1 foot at the dam with the elevation and with the flow and variations of flow? That could be as much as 5 or 6 feet upstream, right?
We would have to go back and look.
We do have the notals. We do have a lot of transects from the dam itself upstream to the next facility that has water surface elevation under the proposed changes. So that is something that we can look at. And another thing to mention, the table that Jeff showed early on, the number of hours varying by month. Spring is certainly a very sensitive time for spawners. We also have fry shortly thereafter. Species that can't dodge, you know, to new habitats. So that's why a lot of the hours are much more limited during that time frame. So we did look at species that are in the system, what their life histories are. And so that was part of the proposal, was taking that into consideration and limiting the number of flexible hours.
Is also the rate of discharge based on electrical use? Or if there's, most of the electricity is shipped out, right?
I don't.
I will be perfectly frank, I'm very ignorant when it comes to, I don't have a lot of understanding of how the power market works and how electricity leaves. But I think in essence, the flexible operations for Great River Hydro is to generate when it makes the most sense for them to do so within these constraints.
So what I do is when I fish, I use water line. So you call in and you find out when they're going to do their discharges. So when I want to be on the river, it's when they discharge. 9 times out of 10, when I'm on the river, I'm below the dam in Bellows Falls, and I watch the river come up dramatically in probably half an hour, 4 to 5 feet, many times. But of course, that's right below the dam. That translates down the river. But it's still, they're doing major releases, and they would jump from like 4,000 CFS all the way up to 16 to 20 sometimes. It's substantial.
To follow up on Betsy's point about having the data to look at you know, how fluctuations affect eggs and so forth, that will be something that we analyze.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.
I see it. Kathy?
You know, I'm always gonna have more. I'm curious about, there are some adjacent wetlands, where there's, you know, currently breeding habitat for bobolink and eastern meadowlark. They're not. Would they fall because of their breeding in those wetland areas? Are they covered by water quality certification?
their bobolinks are breeding in the wetlands or in the grasslands? Grasslands.
Up in that.
And also the wood duck.
Wetlands.
Wetlands. Okay.
Uh,
I don't know, to be honest. It's something we can look at. I know that was raised as Fish and Wildlife put in comments on it as well. Yeah.
Annette, did you have something?
I do. Hi, my name is Annette Spalding, and I'm a scuba diver. And for about 36 years, I've been scuba diving in the river on the underwater rescue team, as well as historical, archaeological, and looking at fish. And I love the Connecticut River so much. And I know there has to be a happy medium here. We all need electricity. The people that I speak with at the dam control many times, just to double check the flow for my underwater videotaping or whatever, have been very wonderful to work with, and I'm very happy about that. But what I'm not happy about as well is hearing this gentleman, Matt, speak about the flow. I've observed a lot of that myself. I've been underwater where the bass really, they make like their little nests and they stay on top of it, you know, with their eggs, and they get really distraught. They're really protective of those eggs. And I've witnessed when the water flow has just changed so fast that it's been, they built their nest, the water was really slow, they were holding back, and then bang, they let it all out so fast. And I've seen the eggs fly off of the nests, and the bass go crazy and banging up against rocks and things. Like, it's just strange behavior to watch when the eggs just disappear. But for the last couple of years, I've had a lot of fishermen been telling me that they'd call me and say, Annette, do you know what kind of a big fish has a big fin on it? It's like a sailboat. Actually, it looks like a shark. And I know what that fin is.
Sturgeon.
It's the fin of a sturgeon. And I've been so excited the last couple of years looking for, and I saw my first one in Northfield, and I was so excited on our underwater rescue team training, as a matter of fact. But we have verification right now. I've been working for 2 years with Micah Kiefer in Curtis Falls. Micah is a short-nosed sturgeon specialist, and he is really wonderful, and we have proof and verification. We have a gentleman, a UVM student that caught and verified and videotaped the short-nosed sturgeon, possibly, maybe, during spawning. We're not sure, because Mike is doing all these, a lot of tests, along with Kate Buckman, who's here today, and DNA testing and such. But we have sturgeon right here in Bellows Falls. And not only one, but when he was reeling it in, there were 2 others side by side with it. And they're federally endangered, and I've done a lot of studies the last few years, especially, this is the final recovery plan, this is the federal regulations for the short-nosed sturgeon, and it is very specific in here about the flow, by law, what has to be done. 300 is not enough. You just need to, now that this has just, come up recently in the last couple months, we just really need to protect them. And just this is just maybe 15 words. It states, since sturgeon require adequate river flows and water temperatures for spawning, any alterations that dam operations pose on a river's natural flow pattern, including increased or reduced discharges, can be detrimental to sturgeon reproductive success. Additionally, dam maintenance activities, such as minor excavations along the shore, release silt and other fine river sediments that could be deposited in nearby spawning sites and degrade critical spawning habitat. That's just one little part, but it goes into the regulations on the flow. And now that this has been determined recently, you'll probably have to revisit with your studies of the fish that you've been studying, have been studying about, because this is a whole different thing. Short-nosed sturgeon, and they are federally protected, and they're really cool things to see too, as a matter of fact. I'm so excited that we have them. But again, we all need electricity. We all want to work together. I feel we should work together and come to a medium, for recreational and for these fish And not just them, the bass and others, and the wetlands and the bird. This is for many generations to come. We need to protect our river for the future. And I'm so happy we've seen such a reversal. And it's so wonderful to see. And I'm really excited about that. And I want to continue going forward. And thank you for listening to my long comment.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comments, questions?
Hi, Wendy Harrison, State Senator. Could you go back to the slide that showed the overhead view of the dam? Because okay, perfect, thank you. The southern portage, I think is it showing?
No, it's not, but I think it's somewhere in this.
Yeah, I think it's actually off of that
Oh, is it off?
picture.
Yeah.
So I just want to make sure people are aware of that because that is just not a good portage. It's not appropriate.
Yeah.
It's just completely inadequate in my opinion. And it would be helpful if those are the only places where folks can physically access the river and there aren't any other alternatives, there should be a way to transport
And a lot of
people and boats.
sorry,
Right.
they've been portaging on the other side, coming down through Bellows Falls and putting in below the dam.
So they've been,
They go in through the park.
okay.
By the gristmill?
Yep, the gristmill, the waterfront park.
Which is also just like off the bottom.
Off the bottom.
A little
Yeah,
bit.
so that would make
That-
more sense actually.
Yeah.
But they still might, it would still be good to have some sort of transport.
It's so bad.
We are proposing.
Yeah,
Oh, good.
they
That is
are.
part of our proposal.
Oh, wonderful.
Oh, good.
Terrific.
That's great.
Okay, so then one other question, then the power
What
canal.
what are you proposing?
Oh, I'm sorry, let's keep talking.
In our proposal of our license application is for the Bellows Falls portage to provide or support financially a livery service.
And who are you?
I'm Great River Hydro.
Hi, good to see you.
That's very good to hear.
Yeah.
I wasn't aware of that.
That's wonderful.
Didn't sound like anybody would.
Yeah, so good for this meeting, and thank you for having this meeting, by the
Yep.
way, when it's not required.
Yep.
So then one other question, the power canal, does it have any other function other than providing the hydro dam with water?
Not that I know of, but, I mean,
Where I think the upstream fish passage.
oh,
For
right,
the
that's,
fish
sorry,
passage.
yes.
Thanks,
Yes,
Beth.
that is,
This is an interesting way you phrased that question. It probably has a lot of other functions in the town. It's a historic site. There's aesthetic
So-
considerations along it. It's like,
yes, so.
you know, so
So as you know, Kathy, but maybe others don't, if the historic, our counterparts in historic preservation are also part of FERC relicensing. So they may be looking at aspects of that I'm not aware of under section 106 of the Historic Preservation Act. So,
Okay, thank you.
yep.
sorry. I didn't get enough sleep last night, so it's been dangerous here. No, sorry. Yeah, I mean, I think the other compelling thing about the canal is that is in fact where almost all of the actual river water
Right.
goes through and meets the other part of the riverbed. So, you know, there's clearly some water quality
Right.
things related to the fact that that's the actual water.
And there was water quality data taken in that canal as part of the relicensing. Yeah, so we have that information.
I think I probably just should clarify this too. I'm a member of the Bellows Falls Historical Society, and the Bellows Falls Historical Society got a grant years ago to have a waterfront park, and there is a place to put your kayaks in, but we do tell people that they might not be able to come back up if the river changes, so we tell them about alternative places they can take out down below. But this is like a nonprofit, and Henny Green didn't lead us any money, that's for sure. It's a total volunteer and very little money, but it is, I just wanted to clarify that there is that access at this park, the community uses it all the time, an average of 87 people a day and that's a lot of people. So think of us when you're doing contributions this year. But anyway, I just wanted, it is access, just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you.
Yeah, it just might help for those that might not be familiar. And I know, Jeff, you did a great job trying to explain what the proposed operation is, but after listening to some of the comments, we are drastically stabilizing flows. You are not going to see, if you look at a different way, you could say that in the months of April, May, June, spawning periods, 98% of the hours, it is inflow and outflow, no peaking, no peaking. So there's a large, very large majority of the time. We reserve some opportunity to generate when the system really is looking for the benefit of hydro, which is to respond quickly to high energy demand periods. But 98% of the hours in that entire period, it is essentially run of river. So you won't see this, like, I've got to worry about the flow because I can't swim or I can't scuba upstream. It is going to be much more stabilized. I grant you, it's not natural and it's not perfect. It's not, but if you saw natural flows, you would probably see lower flows in much of that, much of the times of the year. These are the river is still managed. It's managed upstream, and it is augmented, but it's what you're going to see here is a much more stabilized flow. The time where you're going to see more flexible operation is February. It's winter peaking times. It's when gas is largely focused on home heating, and it drives the demand cycle for electricity. It affects the sources of generation for electricity. It's February, and it is, I guess, fortunate in that the aquatic resource demands during February are much different than they are during June or spawning or other facilities. We did a lot of studies, as you mentioned, and they have in their record of sort of that, and we documented the same thing you're talking about, is eggs that have been exposed. I would say that is in part probably due to operational changes, for sure, but we also know that during the different years of studies, you had oftentimes very wet conditions in May and June during those study periods where the spawning occurred during high flow events.
Yeah.
And when the river receded back down to normal flows, they became exposed. So there's still going to be natural functions that will occur that will cause impacts to resources. We're not going to be able to solve them all, but from a flow standpoint, it's going to be much more stabilized. I just wanted to characterize it a little bit more than just numbers.
With the global warming, I did ask, and with the global warming, this year, the water temps came up in a hurry. The spawn was a month ahead of time. So that means it was in March. And when you mentioned it, you went April, but now it's a month ahead of time. It's completely changed with the global warming and the temperature. So I mean, I'm only telling you this because I see it.
Yeah, well, I'm not really sure what, I mean, we're not gonna see a lot of change in March, but you will see a lot of natural change in March because that's when snowmelt is occurring too, and it can change.
But if you were talking about the spawning, the spawning is occurring earlier.
Okay, I don't want to debate, I'm just trying to respond to when you said you were out there and when we observe things in our studies.
Yeah.
I don't think it's going to always be in March. I don't think it's always going to be in April. I don't think it's always going to be in June or whenever. It will change seasonally.
Yeah.
But from a flow perspective, that period is when we largely restricted the ability to peak, is all I'm trying to say. It's going to be much more stable flows, naturally or otherwise.
Yeah, our difference is I'm a fisherman.
Well,
The number of hours, then that stability that John is speaking to has a seasonality component. So it does include, you know, that February and March.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to get at, the seasonality of it.
Right, so yeah, this is in their proposal. Yeah, as we know, there's a duration of spawning. It can vary. It varies up the length of the Connecticut, let alone from year to year.
Yeah.
So that is captured in the proposal because we are, you know, as a state agency,
But-
we're certainly interested in the, you know, the duration of those spawning activities.
And the spawning for the years has been getting earlier and earlier and earlier as the water and the global warming has warmed the water. The winters have gotten shorter. Thank you.
Yep.
Could I just ask for clarification? Eric said, maybe I wrote this down or understood it wrong, but something about, the proposed was that there was going to be 300 CFS April through July for fish passage. But 300 isn't enough. So is that what I heard, that the proposed is 300?
So the 300 is the proposal to pass in the bypassed reach.
Yeah.
The outflow from the powerhouse will be inflow equals outflow. So they're going to maintain a target water level at the dam, and they'll adjust the units to pass that flow downstream while they're operating inflow outflow. So the flow will be in the river below the project will be determined by that calculated inflow into the project itself to maintain that level. The 300 CFS was proposed for the bypass reach. So that's this section when the river is in the capacity, within the capacity of the project. There will be times when it's spilling still and, you know, high flows are coming through there.
I scuba dive in there and
In this section?
yes, right
Okay.
under the Vilas Bridge and in that little, the channel down there, and that's very, very close to where they were caught. I was just concerned about the 300 because the babies, you know, or the spawning, it just seems so low, but I'm not a scientist.
We keep referring to this as the bypass reaches, which is what FERC refers to it as, but let's call it what it is. It's the Connecticut River. The bypass is really the power canal. It bypasses the Connecticut River. And I think that gets lost, you know, kind of in the process where you've got a section of the Connecticut River that's not functioning right now. This is one of those rare moments that John and I will actually agree on a few things. There's more wind and solar out there, and this is peaking projects like this one, whether it's flexible capacity or not, do have a load balancing effect and allow more renewables to come on. Every dam is destructive of a river. Every hydropower project alters flows in one manner or another. The question here is, how do we allow for things like that here and still protect the environmental values, whether it's fishing, whether it's boating, whether it's aquatic habitat for short-nosed sturgeon. And while you may not have a specific statutory mandate to protect short-nosed sturgeon, you do have a statutory mandate to protect aquatic habitat. And that does include sturgeon. So the federal government hasn't preempted sturgeon in that sense. You're still concerned about fish. And I think it is a fair thing for you to look at. You know, you've got hundreds, if not thousands of dams in Vermont that could probably just go away, that don't serve any value, that don't produce meaningful power or provide flexible capacity. This one does. And I think we can appreciate that. But at the same time, you know, we need to be sure that the other values are being protected. And that's the Connecticut River.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions?
I have one more. I have a comment, just hearing some of the discussion around some of the resource issues. We talked about what the record includes, and part of that record is the 33 studies that that took place to assess what a future license might look like. Some of those do directly sort of speak to water level fluctuations in fish. Those will all be aspects that we analyze in the water quality certification. The other point that I thought is worthwhile making is when we put on the slide the table of percent of time at water surface elevation, there's that's one metric to characterize the current operations and what the proposal looks like. There are a number of other metrics that will also be part of the consideration.
One of the other, oh, can I speak?
Yeah, yeah.
It's not only one fluctuation a day. There can be multiple fluctuations in one day. So I mean,
Under current, the proposal, there would not be those multiple fluctuations in one day, every day.
okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah,
Unless it was coming downstream.
unless it was coming downstream, I
Well,
guess.
it
But
wouldn't
that
be
does,
multiple.
it,
Well, then it could be multiple. I
Well,
mean, if you got
we,
Would be a hygiene.
do you wanna talk about the model or?
Yeah, sure. So Great River Hydro is part of their studies. The 5, I think it was. They created a really intensive hydrologic model. So what it did is it looked at different transects across the river, and I mentioned it earlier, but we're talking for the whole section for all 3 projects. So the most upstream aspect of Wilder, all the way down to the Massachusetts border. Yeah, it's a very large model. And so part of their proposal, what they did is they, and jump in if I'm totally mischaracterizing this, but, so what they did is they understand the flows that are coming into the system. So it does take into account those operations that are occurring upstream. They looked at specific months and different types of years. So when I say types of years, I'm saying very wet years all the way to very dry, so that when we can look at our analysis, when we start to analyze the data, we can look at those bookends. So we can make sure that we're covering all the aspects. So when we're talking about potentially multiplicative flow events, we can look at all of that nodal data from the top of the Wilder impoundment all the way down under their proposal, so under these flex ops. So let's say, and we can see if it does or does not magnify as you go down and that kind of stuff. So we do have that data to perform that kind of analysis.
Some of the constraints limit that as well, like
Right.
reef.
Correct, yeah.
And
So they are required, and I think you mentioned sort of the bass responding quickly. They are proposing to do an up ramp and a down ramp. So there are signals that biologically that fish see from, in natural systems, they can feel that there's gonna be a change coming. So those that are mobile can move. And so that's what that up ramping and down ramping allows for, if that makes sense. So instead, that hydrograph that Jeff showed earlier, sort of the big magnitude swing, if you can envision it all being just like squashed a bit and spread out.
Well, interesting, because fish are barometrically.
Yeah.
They're sensitive,
Yeah.
but not the flows.
There are signals, like especially in pulses, like pulse signals.
From where?
What do you mean?
Where's the signal coming from that they're getting?
So in the natural, I know that in other systems, there might be a short pulse and then more water comes in, like with a rain event. So those.
Oh,
they
you mean you
are-
give them a clue ahead of time?
Yes,
Move,
yes. Sorry, maybe that was a better.
So they're gonna have to learn.
Hopefully there's some, biological component that they already have built in.
But you don't know that.
Well, life histories and the biology of fishes says that.
So is mine, yeah. Ichthyologist?
Huh?
Ichthyologist.
Background is, yeah.
Okay.
But we're also trying to manage habitat,
Right.
not just
Not,
the actual behavior. We're trying to make sure fish have access to tributaries by having, wetted channels. This is the idea of this proposal. It is trying to find the most naturalized, not natural, but naturalized solution to a lot of needs, whether it be habitat, tributary access, wetlands, emergent wetland, a lot of things. And when you have a big system like this and you do 30 studies that cost $12 million to conduct, it's very hard to take all that data and literally thousands and thousands and thousands of pages and try to find one solution. And what we've done here is said, okay, in a more naturalized system, that will have the greatest opportunity to be benefiting all of these things. There's not a silver bullet. If you looked at flows, the greatest if we were to impact flows with high flows, let me try to put this another way. What we found was that the greatest amount of habitat that was changing was the younger life stages to the peaking operations. It wasn't adults. So this is providing a much more stable environment, so you're not pushing young of life aquatic species out of areas. And that's really what kind of we're talking about here, is when we're trying to provide habitat that allows them to be able to move slightly, but not overly tax them. And that's what this is. It's not that there's not going to be fluctuations, they occur naturally, but it's not in a massive, going from a minimum flow of whatever it is, 1,000 CFS here, to 10,000. You just won't see that anymore. That will not occur. Yeah, it will not occur. In fact, you're never gonna see 1,000 CFS anymore. You're gonna see more like 25 to 3,000 pretty much all the time.
We've heard some pretty compelling testimony about the damage that's being done in the reach or the original bed of the Connecticut River. What could you ask Great River Hydro to do to improve that situation? What tools do you have at your disposal to fix that or just ameliorate it?
Can you be more specific?
Yeah, well, what you said about the reach, how little flow, the base of Connecticut River is diverted through the power connection.
Okay, so you're talking specifically about the bypass.
So the reach, the original bed of Connecticut River, is kind of a eco-destructed zone, right? So what can we do to bring that back? And it's what, 3/4 of a mile of the Connecticut River? So that's a significant chunk of river. And I'm curious, what could be done to improve that?
So from the point of view of the 401, we would want to put in a flow that's protective of habitat into that that channel, so that GRH did a what we call in-stream flow habitat assessment. They looked at flows over a range and took measurements of the substrate, the velocity, and the depth. And then you take that information and you look how that translates to specific species and life stages habitat needs. And so when we prescribe one of these, we're looking to basically maintain some portion of that habitat so that we can have fish, as John was saying, habitat in that area for them to use.
How would that physically be done? Would there be some sort of a blockage of the canal so more water would go around? How would you?
They would make adjustments at the dam to provide that water to the bypass reach.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Just a quick follow-up to what you said. So if it's looking at, flows to maintain and, provide better habitats, is it also going to look at possibly fish movement through there, aquatic movement of different animals?
As part of the fish passage settlement agreement, I think there is considerations about especially migratory fishes that may be using the bypass. The fish passage settlement agreement is intensive and lengthy, so I can't speak to the specifics, I apologize. But it includes the potential for upgrading infrastructure as needed. and potentially even doing studies as needed to sort of help answer those questions.
Any other questions, comments?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank
Yeah.
you.
Oh, it's been a great dialogue.
Yeah.
Tonight's not your only chance to
Right.
to
Yeah,
provide
just-
comments either. You have the window.
Yeah, just a reminder, yeah, we are, have an open comment period till October 1st. So if you have additional thoughts that you want us, or comments you want to share with us, information, you can send it to myself. I have cards here, my contact information's there. I can stick a few of these.